What's up, y'all? This is your girl, Minister Jasmine Love. Today at Club 316, we're talking about imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome makes it very hard for you to connect with others and accept yourself. So, here at Club 316 today, we're going to be talking about the spiritual root to imposter syndrome, how to gain victory, have healing and wholeness in the area of imposter syndrome, as well as how to have victory in your identity and receive your identity from God Himself. So, if this is something that can be helpful to you or help you to deal with somebody in your life that is dealing with imposter syndrome, I highly, highly recommend you keep watching. So, y'all, this is Minister Jasmine Webb. Like I said, I am a servant in the capacity of ministry as well as coaching and mentorship. So, I am the club mentor for Club 316. Club 316 is a Christian community support group. Basically, we're here to support each other through life's issues. Here at Club 316, we value healing and wholeness. So everything that we talk about stems around God's true heart for our lives in those issues. A lot of times, the things that we go through in life is not necessarily because we did something wrong. It's because we don't understand God's true intention for the area of that area of our life. Also, we don't understand or we don't believe that God has a heart of love for us. So I believe personally that the more you get to know God, the more you get to know yourself. Looking into God's heart holds up a mirror to not only how you are to the outside world, but how God created you to be, so that you can make sure that those two people line up to who God intended you to be and not who you shaped yourself after because of XYZ in your life, because of the people you hung out with, or because of maybe the lifestyle that you decided to lead as you became an adult. God wants you to be able to live your truth. And your truth, He has planted in your identity. But your identity cannot be depicted by other people in your outside life. So that kind of is a great way to segue into what we're talking about today. So today we're talking about imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome is a personality complex, or just it is something that a lot of people deal with, but isn't talked about much. And I know that a lot of social media content creators, they deal with imposter syndrome. A lot of people who are performers or entertainers, they deal with imposter syndrome, and that's understanding, but they're not the only ones who deal with imposter syndrome. There are some of us who walk around in life feeling like we have to put up this facade of one person because the person we are on the inside is not good enough. And the thing that happens when you do that is it actually makes you feel lonely, and it makes you feel very unseen because you have created and manufactured this person that you think that is easier for everybody to receive than you are. So what happens is when you get home and you get by yourself and you think about your day, because one thing imposter syndrome, people who suffer from imposter syndrome do as well, is they're constantly thinking about how their day went and how they portrayed themselves throughout the day. They're running things that happen through their mind when they lay down in there in their quiet time. They're thinking about, wow, I wish I would have said this. I wish I would have did this, because they're constantly concerned about how people see them on that outside. But with that, it comes with extreme loneliness, and it makes it hard for you to understand who you are. And when you want to be who you are, you feel like it's too late because you've already put up a front. And now people will look at you as fake or phony, right? So here's the actual definition for imposter syndrome. It's perceived fraudulence, which involves feelings of self-doubt and personal incompetence that persist despite your education, your experience, and your accomplishments. And to counter these feelings, you might end up working harder and harder and holding yourself to an ever higher standard. Now, what happens when you're always working harder and harder and you keep raising the standard up for yourself? One thing that happens is you never feel enough. So you always feel defeated. So you're dealing with feelings of loneliness. You're feeling, and when you feel that way, it takes you to what, a deep sadness. You have a deep sadness that doesn't seem to go away, as well as you end up having mood swings because of, again, you feel like nothing you do is adding up to anything. You have a lack of trust when it comes to people around you, because again, they only know the person that you've shown them. You don't feel like they really know who you are. And also, a lot of people deal with workaholism. They deal with things like the inability to like detach from an outcome. So say something went wrong. You're ruminating over that thing. You're thinking about it. You're like, man, I wish I could have did this way. You have a hard time detaching from an outcome of something. Also, you deal with perfectionism, which that's a given. We just talked about that. And then we have what's called like a messiah complex or martyr complex, right? Which basically means that either you feel like you have to be the one to save everybody, that if you are not on point, other people's lives are in at stake, and you put yourself out there to be the messiah. You sacrifice yourself for others because you're really trying to make gain the approval and the acceptance of other by sacrificing yourself, right? Or you become like a martyr, where like you're always putting yourself on the back burner so that somebody else can feel valued by you, so in turn they will value you back, right? And then of course we already talked about this deep seated feeling of unworthiness. And God doesn't want this for you. God does not want that for you. So I said that in this video we will be talking about the root. What's the root cause of imposter syndrome? And God dealt with me on this because I realized that most of my life I dealt with imposter syndrome. And even now, when I get up and I get ready to make these videos, I'm constantly having to remind myself, why are you sounding like this person? Why are you sounding like that person? Why are you being jazzed? And it's because I have a history of imposter syndrome where I felt like I had to put forth my best face when I got in front of people, to where I became what I called a Christian robot. Right, I just said the right things, did the right things, and it came to a point to where my own family, my sister, felt like when she saw me cry one time, she was like, wow, I never really seen you break down about something like this. It's kind of refreshing, because I had spent so much of my life portraying perfect Patty, or portraying somebody that will fit into any circle, because I was really, really looking for acceptance, and I was trying to prove to myself that I was valuable. But the spiritual root to imposter syndrome is spiritual orphan syndrome. Now, this is a spirit that causes a feeling of unworthiness and a fear of rejection and abandonment, which causes the individual to feel driven to perfectionism or a need to prove themselves to others or prove themselves to themselves, right? And they have a so that they have a sense of value or a sense of importance, right? And I kind of just explained that a little bit, that in my life, when I was younger, God had to reveal this to me this year. One of my blessings was God letting me know that He was releasing me to be who I am. No apologies, and no worries. Just go out there and be jazz. That's who I want. And the other day we were talking in my favorite prayer parking spot, y'all. And he was like, "Oh, you think about when you were younger. When you were younger, you always had felt the need to be really good. You wanted adults to see how good of a kid you were. You wanted your parents, your grandparents, because I lived with my mom and my grandfather growing up. Um, I wanted them to see me as a good child. I really wanted them to accept me as a good child, right? And then as I got older, it's transitioned from just my parents to other people around me. So I was very observant. So I would observe around me And I would look at what made other people seem like they were being accepted, and I would make little changes to myself so that I can be accepted. One thing that happened from that is that I had no clue what I liked anymore when I got older. I lost my personality in a lot of ways because I was constantly shifting to whoever was important to me at the moment's preference. And before I knew it, the only thing I knew that I still loved was singing. But besides that, I had no clue what any of my hobbies were, um, because I had become a chameleon, basically. Also, he explained to me that as I got older and I wanted older people to accept me, when I got saved, I carried that toxic behavior over into my ministry life, where I wanted to be accepted so bad that if anybody had a grievance with me, I would immediately shift it and be like, oh, I'm sorry. I don't want to be a stumbling block to anybody. And I would immediately shift myself according to the grievance of somebody who I was ministering to. And again, it really put me in a place of who am I? I felt so lost. And God reminded me that Jesus is perfect enough for the both of us. So I don't have to be perfect anymore. He says, stop trying to be perfect. You can go out there and make a mess and make mistakes. That's all right, because that's why Jesus died for you. What you're doing is rejecting the gift of Jesus's righteousness when you are trying to be perfect all the time and you are exhausted. I was physically, mentally, and spiritually exhausted from being perfect. And carrying it over into this beautiful gift of salvation that God had reminded me of when I got older, even tainted my relationship with God to where I started to feel like it was just so much work, just like everything else in life. And God was like, my yoke is easy and my burden is light, but you're trying to add more weight onto my yoke. You're trying to add more weight onto my burden. So I hope that helps you understand more. So with spiritual orphan syndrome, it talks about rejection and abandonment. And we know that orphans, they deal with identity issues because they don't necessarily always know who their parents were, or maybe their parents weren't alive long enough to speak into them what their identity was. And that takes me to the next part of this, is the fact that we need our parents to confirm and affirm who we are and that we have value in our lives. We need them to speak those things over us. And in the Bible, there was a whole principle where you are supposed to speak blessings over your children. But if you don't do that, your child will grow up trying to search out their identity instead of just live out the identity that you have illuminated before them. It's not that you're telling your child who to be, like you're going to be a doctor. No, what you're telling your child is that you're blessed, that you're loved, that you are valuable, that your content of who you are is valuable. So before you go and do anything, you are valuable to this world. There's nobody like you. Just affirming your child in that way. And God did this for Jesus. See, God did this for Jesus. God the Father did this for Jesus before he began his ministry. When he was getting baptized and John the Baptist rolls him up out of the water, God the Father spoke from heaven and said, this is my son this is my beloved son of whom I'm well pleased. So God the Father did not wait until Jesus died on the cross to let him know how much he loved him. He didn't wait until Jesus completed his purpose on earth for him to say, well done, I love you. He had been speaking love over him his entire life. And he had been affirming him and confirming the love and value that Jesus had his whole entire life, which gave him the strength to carry out the hard times in life, still remaining who he was. A lot of us flip-flop who we are because nobody spoke into us the value about who we really were. So because we never had a sense of value to who we really are, every time we get into a situation where people try to say we're something that we're not, we accept that persecution instead of running it through the truth mill. Right? We accept these things instead of saying, wait a minute, that's not who I am. If I made a mistake, that's one thing. I can shift that, but I will not accept this as something that is a part of my identity, because I know who I am. I am not a failure. Yes, I may have had a hard time. I may have not done well in that area, but I'm not a failure because God spoke over me. He spoke over a blessing over me. And that's where we're going next. That the same blessing that God spoke over Jesus, he sings over you daily. God God says that you are his beloved child of whom he is well pleased. When he made you, he was pleased with you. When he made you with all his favorite stuff, because he made you with the intention to be loved. So there is nothing you have to do to show yourself worthy of the love of God, because he made you with intention to love you. So he loves you. Before you do a thing, I remember God told me that if you don't preach another word, after I went through a really hard time in ministry, God was like, if you don't preach another word, if you don't minister another word, you're still my daughter and I still love you. Now, I have a call over your life. I have a call for you. But if you never do another thing, I love you. So we know that the triggers to this is absent parents, distant parents, physical abuse victims, and sexual abuse victims. Basically, these are all areas where we have learned not to trust with our parents, and we don't have a trust of security in affirmation in our parents, because they either weren't there or they didn't show themselves competent enough to speak those things over us. So we talked about some of the traits of spiritual orphan syndrome being a lack of trust, deep sadness, loneliness, perfectionism, mood swings. But we also want to talk about the kind of thoughts that somebody who is dealing with spiritual orphans syndrome run through their mind about. Okay, the false narratives that they think about God. So they think that God the Father is angry with them, right? They always feel like God the Father is angry with them. And that was me. I used to feel like God was mad with me, and I was always trying to get back into his good graces because I was so flawed and I stayed sitting on mistake. Every time I thought I wasn't doing bad, I will find another thing that, oh, I've been sinning. And God was like, that's kind of how it works. That's why you need me, because before you didn't have your ear to me, so I couldn't alert you to the things that you were doing that was sinful. And sinful is just bad for you, and it's missing the mark for God. So God's like, don't be sad and think that I'm mad at you because I'm revealing to you that you are sinning. I'm revealing to you that you're sinning because I love you and I'm your parent, and I shouldn't let you continue to act that way when I know it's detrimental to your relationship with me and detrimental to yourself. The next one is God is never pleased with you, or God is always condemning you and judging you. I used to think that too. That's why I tried to be perfect before God at all times. My prayer life really suffered from this mentality because I would never be transparent with God, right? About 3 or 4 years ago, God revealed to me that he was my Abba, which means father, and that I can come and tell on whoever I want to tell on to him. That he said I can come sit on his lap and pour my heart out to him. I could tell on who been hurting me. I could tell everything. I never had to hold back a thing from him again. And he already knew the things that were deep in my heart. So why would I come with a mask on? He used to say, stop worshiping me with a mask on. And I never knew what that meant until he explained it this way. So God is not condemning you or judging you. God is truly interested. He's truly interested in what's going on in your life, even though he sees it all. He's interested in your point of view, and he's interested in you trusting him enough to share it with him. And it's not so that he can say, ha, you're a bad person. It's so that he can say, okay, I know that hurts. Lay your head here and I'm going to help you deal with this. Hand it to me and you won't ever have to deal with this again. And if you stumble, and this is another reason why you stumble, I'm here to help you up, not yell at you while you're down on your knees. Some people think that God is the kind of God that walks with you as soon as you trip and fall. He's like, what in the world? Get off of your knees. What is wrong with you? God is not that kind of God. God is like a mother or a father walking with their child, and their child falls and they say, oopsie daisies, and they lean down to their knees, they kiss the baby's boo-boos, and they pick them up and nurse them back to health, and then they put them back down to walk again. That's the kind of God we serve, okay? The next one is you must meet his standard or he will get you. And I heard people teaching their kids this. When I used to be in youth ministry, they would be like, you better stop saying that, for God strike you down. Just totally scarring the kids, scarring them to think that God is always ready with the lightning bolt to strike them down if they do something wrong. How would you ever get close to a God that seems that mad all the time and easily triggered? And God's like, that's not even who I am. Stop teaching them kids that. And some of us teach our kids that because that's what the church taught us, because they thought that instilling fear of God into you that way, instead of fear as in respect of God, that would keep you from being a horrible person. But all it did was drive you further away from God and into the arms of somebody that was a little bit more flexible with your flaws, right? So the next one is, he won't be there if I don't have it all together. So if I don't have all my stuff in order, God won't be there for me. That's the idea that somebody who is struggling with spiritual orphan syndrome has in their head, that I need to have it all together for him to be present. And God is like, I was with you when you were tore up from the floor up. I was with you. And I remember God telling me that I told you that I would never leave you nor forsake you. So every time you went to go do whatever you were doing with so-and-so, I was there. And yes, it broke my heart to see you demeaning yourself that way, but I never left you. And that's why when they had impure or bad thoughts to hurt you or to take you out, because I knew you would get to the place you are at now, I covered you, I kept you, and I got you out of those situations because my spirit was always with you. And I thank God for that. And the next one is, he killed Jesus to deal with his anger about you. Wow. I've seen a lot of posts on Facebook that say, how do you serve a God that kills his son because he's mad at people for sinning? That's not what God did. And that just shows me that people have not been taught the true story of salvation. Because really and truly what God did was he had a conversation with himself. He looked at the world and he said, wow, my baby's struggling, and this is me from my mindset, because God already knew. He had a plan from beginning of time. And that's another video. I can't go through that all here. This is all a part of a plan from before time to make sure everything lined up right, because that's how sovereign God is. But God had to come. He basically said, okay, I'm going to have a son who is me. So now Jesus is him talking to himself. He says, I'm angry. They have sinned, that has made my wrath. And Jesus said, you know what? I'm going to go and die for them because I can rise back up. And then now all of us can be together. And they both was like, bet. Because they're one. They're one. How can he be mad with himself about you? He's not mad. He came and he made a solution to an issue that he knew you weren't going to be able to get yourself out of. And that alone shows mercy, because he knows that you are not going to be able to say no to every temptation of the devil. But he says, I love you so much that I will make a way for you to be with me, even though you can't say no sometimes. So we're just debunking these false narratives. But all of these false narratives, what they do is make you feel distant from God, and they make you feel emotionally disconnected from God. Like a lot of people say, I believe in God, but we're just not, he's just God. He's there. And that's an emotionally disconnected relationship with God, which unfortunately will not get you to heaven. An emotionally disconnected relationship with God will have you looking real crazy on Judgment Day. Because God says that they know me. They know me with their mouths. They honor me with their mouths, but their hearts are far from me. Which means, like, when God says, depart from me because I never knew you, it's because you never kicked it with him. It's, imagine somebody coming up to you on your wedding day, and you're about to go, and it was like, I'm trying to come to so and so wedding. I'm trying to come to your wedding, and they was like, do you know this person? And this person knew you like through Facebook. They followed you on Facebook, but you never had a conversation with them. You don't really know them. You'll be like, no, I don't know them. They can't come in. Just as simple as that. You never had a relationship with me, so why would I invite you to an intimate gathering like this? This is for intimacy. Heaven is for intimacy with God. So why would he invite you to intimacy with him if you never had intimacy with him? That's why this is such an attack from the enemy. The enemy is trying to do exactly what he did to Adam and Eve in the garden. He's trying to make distance between you and God. But God is always coming back to shorten the distance between you. The enemy got them kicked out of heaven. But what did he do? He said, that's all right, because I have a son that's coming. He said, the son of the woman will what? Crush the head of the serpent. From that time period, he said, you can't get from by me. I'm going to always be with you. I don't care what little buddy over here do. Most of us, period, to be honest, the enemy is the equivalent to a sheepdog. So he scare you right back into the arms of Jesus, or you get tore up by the sheepdog. Which one you want? You can use the sheep. The sheepdog can scare you into the arms of God because you know he out there and he ravenous. Or you can go out there and be tore up by the sheepdog and be looking over the fence at the ones who are being taken care of by the great shepherd. Which one do you want to be? I don't know how. I went sideways, y'all. My bad. So let's keep going. So traits like having a hard time seeing others praised or without feeling insecure, that's a trait of dealing with imposter syndrome. Being happy when someone else fails, that's a trait of imposter syndrome and spiritual orphan syndrome. And this may not be like, whoa, they failed. This might be like, thank God somebody else fails too. That's not healthy. You should be trying to help them succeed, not wish for them to fail so you can feel better about your failure, right? I'm never feeling enough. There was a young girl who actually committed suicide not too long ago, and in her suicide letter she said, I wish me and God could have gotten closer and he could have saved me, but I never felt enough. Sis was dealing with imposter syndrome. Sis was dealing with spiritual orphan syndrome. She did not see God as her daddy. She just seen him as a master. And God asked me this question. Why do you think I made humans and I made angels? Why didn't I just make humans angels? If I already had a species, why did I make a new one? Because angels are sons of God as well, but they are sons of God in a matter of servitude, right? Humans are children of God. So we get to relate to him not only as master, but as father. So when we serve him, it's almost like when you serve your parent, you're not serving for money. You're serving because you love them. And you know that you just love to take care of them and be there with them. And that's what God wants for us. Wants from us to be children and not to be angels, So a lot of people are feeling never enough because they're too busy trying to be like an angel, just having God as a master, when they really should be seeing God as a father who is relentlessly trying to raise them up and mature them and help them do good and always has their back. Okay, so a lot of people who struggles with this, they self-medicate their loneliness with physical stimulation. And physical stimulation could be in the form of like drugs. It could be like narcissism, where everything has to be about what they want and how they want it. It could be self-indulgence, like gluttony. God got on me about gluttony, y'all. About gluttony and different things like that. Constantly working so that you can keep getting accolades, constantly working because that's where you feel valued at. And serial relationships. You get out of one long-term relationship or one relationship and get into the next one and the next one. You don't know how to be by yourself. This is an indication you don't know who your daddy is. And you need somebody to speak some identity into you. Okay? All right. So let me see here. You feel driven for the need to success. You feel you have anger and fits of rage randomly, or because you're losing control of stuff, you start to freak out, and everybody knows you by these fits of rage that you have. They're like, "Oh, she about to have a can I say that a white chick moment." You're always in competition with others. When people are not competing with you, you're competing with them. Even in church. You over here, you see brother so-and-so with 4 chairs, you over here with 10 chairs. Like, I got you. Or you see somebody else get claps on their sermon, you like, next week when I preach, everybody in here gonna be crying and falling out. You gonna see who the master preacher is. And God is like, are you serious? Are you all right? So yes, you need God to speak things into you. So the greatest gift known to mankind is to accept and receive and walk in the love of the Father, who so loved the world, Club 316, that he gave his only begotten son, so that you don't have to be perfect. You get to ride out on Jesus' perfectness and allow God to reshift your mind. Because I'm going to tell you the last thing God told me is, and it's going to bless you because it's going to be so simple. You're going to be like, what? You mean I've been struggling all this time? It's this simple? Let me tell you what God told me. You spent a lot of time with me, daughter, and I have taught you many things. Apply what I've taught you. If you struggle and you fall, Jesus is perfect for the both of you. Get up and try again. But go out there and just be yourself and have a good time in the new mindset that I've taught you. Doesn't that sound so simple? And I'm like, you mean to tell me I'm out here fasting? I mean, still fast. Still fast, because that's how I was able to get words like this from God and get clarity from God, is because I spent time in his presence fasting. And that's not what I'm saying. Fast still. But there were times where God didn't tell me to fast. I was fasting because I was trying to punish myself and put more of a burden on myself. But you mean I'm out here doing all these things? Excuse me. Excuse me. I'm out here doing all these things trying to be perfect. And the whole time you like, I done taught you how to do stuff. Go practice it. You fall. Jesus got your arm. He gonna pick you up. I'm gonna brush you off. And you keep on trying again. And I'm like, wow. And when I tell you, it made it easier for me not to sin. Ain't that crazy? When God says, if you fall, it's all right. We'll dust you off. It made me easier to go out there and not feel so pressured not to sin, which in turn made me not sin as much. What a no-brainer, right? The second thing, so I have 3 steps for those who are dealing with a spiritual identity crisis. Okay, they're having trouble knowing who they are. They feel orphaned. They feel like they have no spiritual covering, no spiritual parent. First of all, God has always loved you and will never stop loving you. God has always been intentionally looking out for you. Okay, and there's nothing about you that shuns God away from you. God has always been intentionally looking out for you and making sure that you're good. You have always been his priority from the time that you were in your mother's womb until now. Nobody has understood you the way that God does. That's why God likes you to pray to him, because he really enjoys to hear you talk about things from your perspective. He really wants to get close to you, and he already understands where you're coming from. It's not a judgmental place, but he will correct you because a father corrects their child. God wants you to see him as your daddy so that you can get closer to him and so that you can get what you need to be satisfied here on earth. Everything that you need to be really satisfied here on earth comes from your connection with God. If you don't connect with God as a father, you will always have this deep and this nagging hole inside of your heart that can never be filled with anything. I remember the emptiness I felt, and I tell this testimony all the time, but my hole in my heart had gotten so big. And this is a saved person, right? I'm saved, but I never knew Christ is my daddy. I never knew Abba is my father. I never knew Abba is my father until I got way older. But I had such a huge hole in my heart that I literally was like, I don't want to live anymore. Take this life. I don't want it. And the only thing that made me stay was my son Javari, and realizing nobody understood him the way that I understood him. But God. And I knew that God planted Javari in my life. He was 5 years old at the time, but he had allowed me to get close enough to him. Like, he came so strategically, because maybe if Javari was a little baby, I wouldn't have learned his personality to where I knew that, oh, he's just like his mama. He needs me. But, he would have been able to be somebody else's little baby, and I wouldn't have felt as bad leaving this earth. But with me, have had spent 5 years with him and loved him and seeing how his mind works and seeing how God worked through him. I was like, this baby needs me, but I literally hate it here. I feel nothing. I got to a place of spiritual numbness that I've never known in my life. And I was literally I felt like a deathbed. It felt like I was laying in my bed. It was days of me laying in my bed. I never shared this part before. Days and days of laying in my bed, just thinking about how I don't want to be here. And I had people come and visit with me. I had a guy friend come and chill with me, and like through this situation I was going through, and none of those people mattered. Nobody could feel me. Nobody could feel that hole in me. And then I remember just being like, God, if you are here and you are real, and I know you're a real God. Like, for me, I never questioned that God was real. I just questioned about his caring. I'm like, God, I don't know what you're doing, but you're going to have to show up and you're going to have to be apparently here because I am empty. I am numb. I feel nothing but sadness. And that sadness even isn't a numbness. It's so weird. It's like a black hole of living. So God started, when I cried out to God, he came and he flooded me with identity first. He started to reveal to me why I seen things the way I seen, why I was dealing with the things I was going through, why I was in attack the way I was in attack. He started revealing things about who I am and the value of who I am. And he saved me. So one thing, the first thing that I want to tell you outside of understanding that God is your daddy is that you need to know that when your mama can't do it for you, when your daddy is not stunting you, can't do nothing for you at that time, when your step parents can't do it for you, when your granddaddy, your grandma can't do it for you, when your child is just barely doing it for you because he's another liability, when all these things are happening and it doesn't really seem like it's anybody really can have your back, your brothers and sisters don't even know what's going on with you. When you cry out to God, he comes and he saves you. And he comes, I hate to say he comes, I just want to say he don't come, he hearkens, because he never left. And he just been waiting for you to be open enough to hear him. Because whole time God's been speaking and God has been wooing and trying to let you know he was there. But sometimes because you are so busy trying to convince other people of your value and how you could be a really good candidate for their love, God is over there like, I love you. My love is what matters. So I literally had to get thrown out by the world. I had to go through rejection from everybody. And even rejection from my own body for me to be able and be in a place where I can receive God's love and that my ears were open to hear what he had to say. So sometimes rock bottom is the place where God allows you to go in safety, in his safety, to hear his voice. I don't know who that was for. And next, our parents are perfect. Our parents are struggling too, and a lot of them, they had absent parents. They had distant parents. They went through physical and sexual trauma. So they're doing the best of what they got. But because God is our alpha father, he is our father, parents are only meant to be surrogates for us. He uses them as his hands and feet to care for us through his provision, through his providing. And if for some reason a parent is distracted by the enemy or has determined that they are not in a place where they can take care of you and they walk away, I'm almost ready to bet that you have other people in your life, whether it was a best friend, whether it was a classmate, a teacher, a pastor, who stood up and said, I'm going to stand in their place and I'll be God's arms and legs for you this season. And then another season, another arm and legs come. God has done that for me. And it's all through God's love. And lastly, God is not people and people aren't God. So don't switch their roles. Don't put people in a place where they give you value, where they tell you whether you're valuable or not. Don't give people the role to be able to speak into you who and what you are. That's not their job, and they're not qualified to. God is the one who is qualified to speak blessings over you, to tell you who you are, to tell you how loved you are, to tell you how much value you are. And also he's hidden his kingdom in your heart. So there are certain purposes that only you can do because he's placed it in you. So stop looking on the outside for what's on the inside of you. And God is not people. So stop looking at God as unreliable. Stop looking at God as not trustworthy with the big things. He's the only one. You're not trustworthy with the big things. God is the only one that's trustworthy with the big things that go wrong. I will leave you high and dry. I believe that Jesus in the New Testament said Jesus knew the hearts of men and that they were fickle. People are fickle, but God is so solid. God is so secure. So I just pray that this blesses somebody. And this helps you to reconnect with Abba as your father. Because Abba is your father. He's your father. Abba just means Papa. And it's like I grew up without saying daddy very often. Lord, you got me telling all my business. My dad wasn't really there for a lot of years of my life. And I called my stepdad by his name. And not because I didn't like him or anything, but to me, his name was like daddy to me. Like that was who he was. Just like you call your mama, I called him his name, and that was who he was to me. That was his term of endearment. To the fact where I can't even hear nobody else called the same name without thinking daddy, thinking that person. But I didn't grow up saying daddy very often. So when God was like, you call me God, you call me Lord, you call me Master, but you don't ever call me Papa. And that's who you need. That's who you need. You need a Papa. And I'm your Papa, so you have to start calling me. And at first it was so weird, but now it just rolls off my tongue because without Abba, I would be such a broken jazz. I would be such a broken jazz. I was a broken jazz without an Abba. I needed my Abba. And so do you, y'all. So I hope this helps and bless you. If you have questions, if you have any concerns, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll be happy to put together a coaching session for you. If you are needing help with getting over these traits, say, okay, I've realized this is who I am, and I have some of those toxic traits that you talked about, and I just want to live a life free of those traits, and I want to walk in my identity in Christ as his daughter or his son. I'm here to help you with a heart-to-heart coaching session, and I will give you some practical steps to apply to help you better deal with those traits that you don't want to see in yourself anymore. Okay, so God bless you, God keep you, and I just want to remind you that you don't have to worry so much about letting go of the traits. And God will make sure the traits go away. I'm here to help you to apply things, and I'm here to talk for you to talk to. But one thing I just don't want to leave, it would be irresponsible of me to leave here and make you think that you have to deal with those traits and those toxic things that you don't like about yourself on your own. You give it to God, and sometimes I would give it to God and forget that I gave it to God. And then 2 years later, I wake up and I'm no longer struggling with that because God is able to do that. All right, y'all. So I'm going for a bye.